Zara Mensah gripped the steering wheel, weaving through Seoul traffic with her heart hammering against her ribs. 15 minutes. She had 15 minutes to reach the interview that would change her life. Her phone buzzed with a notification she didn't dare glance at. The light ahead flickered amber. She pressed the accelerator. A black limousine shot out from a side street and braked hard in front of her. Zara slammed the brakes. Metal screamed against metal. Her car jolted forward, crashing into the limousine's rear panel with a violent crunch. Silence swallowed the street. Then chaos. Security men in dark suits surrounded her car before she could even unfasten her seatbelt. Zara's hands trembled as she stepped out, already rehearsing an apology, already calculating how much this would cost her. "I'm so sorry, I didn't see." The rear door of the limousine opened. Zara braced herself for fury, for threats, for the kind of arrogance she'd heard Seoul's elite were famous for. Instead, a man stepped out with quiet, deliberate calm. Tall, sharp-suited, his expression unreadable. His eyes swept over the damage to his car, then lifted to her face, and froze. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice low, almost unsteady. "Zara Mensah," she said, confused by the question. The man said nothing. His guards exchanged uncertain glances, clearly unused to seeing their employer speechless. Zara shifted on her feet, waiting for the anger she still expected. It never came. "Sir," one of the guards finally said, "should we call your lawyers?" The man blinked, as if surfacing from somewhere far away. "No," he said. "Let it go. Handle the damage through insurance." Zara stared at him. "You're not going to press charges?" "No," he repeated, quieter now. He turned to leave, then stopped. Zara noticed it then. A faint scar curling along his wrist, pale and old. Something about the shape of it tugged at a memory she couldn't place, distant and half-formed, like a dream dissolving at the edges. He caught her staring and pulled his sleeve down. "Get home safely, Miss Mensah," he said, and disappeared into the limousine. Zara stood on the sidewalk long after the car pulled away, her pulse still racing for reasons that had nothing to do with the crash. She didn't get the man's name. She didn't need to. 2 days later, on her first morning at her new job, a position she'd miraculously still gotten despite arriving late and shaken from the interview, she saw his photograph on the lobby wall. Kwon Jae-hwan, Chief Executive Officer. Her stomach dropped. The company she now worked for belonged to the same man whose car she had crashed into. The same man who, for reasons she couldn't understand, had let her walk away without consequence. She told herself it was coincidence. Seoul was full of Kwon-owned buildings, Kwon-owned companies, Kwon money threaded through half the city. But when he appeared in the executive corridor 3 days later and their eyes met across the room, she saw it again, that same flicker of recognition, quickly hidden behind practiced composure. "Miss Mensah," he said, stopping in front of her desk. "Settling in well?" "Yes, thank you," she said carefully. "Mr. Kwon, I have to ask, is this some kind of coincidence?" "Seoul is a small city for people who move in the same circles," he said, which wasn't an answer at all. He walked away before she could press further. That night, alone in her small apartment, Zara found herself thinking not of the accident, not of her new job, but of Ghana. Of a summer more than 15 years ago that she rarely let herself remember. A frightened Korean boy hiding behind her family's house. A boy who flinched at loud noises and refused to say why. A boy she'd protected without asking questions, because that was simply who she'd been raised to be. She hadn't thought about him in years. She'd assumed, the way children assume things without evidence, that he'd simply vanished back into a life she couldn't imagine and never returned. She pulled up a photo of Kwon Ji-hwan on her phone, the one from the company's investor page. Clean-cut, powerful, untouchable. Nothing like the trembling boy from her memory. And yet, her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She answered hesitantly. "Hello." Silence stretched on the other end. Then a voice, quiet and careful. "Do you still hum when you're nervous?" Zara's breath caught in her throat. No one asked that question. No one alive could ask that question except one person, and that person had disappeared from her life before she'd even turned 15. "Who is this?" she whispered, though some part of her already knew. The line went dead. Her hands shook as she set the phone down. Outside her window, a black car idled at the curb, engine humming low in the darkness, headlights cutting through the night like watching eyes. If you're feeling the chills already, make sure to subscribe, because this story is only getting started, and what Zara discovers next will change everything she thought she knew about her past. The next morning, Zara found an envelope waiting on her desk. No name, no return address. Inside was a single photograph, faded, its edges soft with age. A young girl and a young boy stood in front of a modest house in Accra, both grinning, sunlight bright behind them. Zara's hand trembled as she recognized her own face. 14 years old, gap-toothed, arms slung around a thin, nervous boy who barely smiled at the camera. She hadn't seen this photo in over a decade. She didn't even know it still existed. She marched straight to the executive floor, ignoring the assistant who tried to stop her, and pushed open Kwon Ji-hwan's office door. He looked up from his desk, unsurprised, as though he'd been expecting her. "Where did you get this?" she demanded, slamming the photograph down. Ji-hwan rose slowly. For a long moment he only looked at her, something raw moving behind his controlled expression. "Ghana," he said. "A summer I spent hiding from men who wanted to hurt my father. You don't remember me because I was a different person then. Frightened. Small." Zara's mouth went dry. "Min, you're the boy who—" "I go by Ji-hwan now," he said gently. "But yes, you hid me in your family's storage room for 3 nights. You brought me food when your parents weren't looking. You never once asked who I was or why men were searching for me." Zara's knees felt weak. She gripped the edge of his desk. "That was 15 years ago. You just disappeared." "I didn't want to," he said, his voice tightening. "I was taken back to Korea before I could say goodbye properly. I promised you I'd find you again. It took longer than I intended." "You've known this whole time?" Zara's voice rose. "The accident. Was that even an accident?" "Yes," he said quickly. "I didn't orchestrate that, Zara. Promise you. But when I saw your face when you said your name, I couldn't just let you walk away a second time." Zara sat down, overwhelmed, memories rushing back in fragments. The frightened boy. His wrist, bleeding after he'd caught it on a broken gate while escaping through her backyard. The scar. "Your wrist," she breathed. "I remember now. I helped clean that wound myself." Ji-hwan pulled back his sleeve, revealing the same pale scar she'd noticed at the crash site. "I've carried this every day since. A reminder of the only person who ever protected me without wanting anything in return." Zara didn't know whether to feel comforted or terrified. Too much was happening too fast. The mysterious help she'd started receiving over the past weeks suddenly made sense. Her mother's medical bills quietly paid in full. Her apartment's new security system, installed without explanation. Her unexpected promotion. "That was you," she said. "All of it." "Consider it repayment," Ji-hwan said. "For a debt I could never fully repay." Zara stood, pacing his office, trying to steady her breathing. "I don't need repayment, Ji-hwan. I need to understand what's happening. Why did those men come after your family back then? Why does it still matter now?" Something shifted in his expression. Hesitation, maybe fear. "It's complicated. Try me." Before he could answer, his phone buzzed sharply on the desk. He glanced at the screen and his jaw tightened. "I have a meeting," he said, voice suddenly distant. "We'll talk more. I promise." Zara left his office with more questions than answers, the photograph clutched in her hand like evidence of a life she barely remembered living. She wasn't the only one who'd noticed the sudden closeness between Zara and the CEO. Down the hall, in a glass-walled office overlooking the Seoul skyline, Kwon Tae-hyun watched the exchange through the security monitors with narrowed eyes. He'd built his patience over years, waiting for the right opportunity to claim what he believed should have been his from the beginning. Ji-hwan's sudden interest in an unknown employee, a Ghanaian woman with no corporate ties, no family wealth, no obvious reason to matter, unsettled him. He pulled up her personnel file. Zara Mensah, born in Accra. Father, Kwame Mensah, deceased. Taehyun's fingers stilled on the keyboard. He recognized that name. He opened an old, encrypted file his own father had left behind years ago, documents he'd never fully understood, references to a botched operation in Ghana, a witness who'd interfered, a name redacted in every official record but scrawled once, carelessly, in a private note. Kwame Mensah. Taehyun leaned back in his chair, a slow, calculating smile forming. If Zara's father had been involved in what happened all those years ago, there was a possibility, however small, that he'd left something behind. Evidence. Proof of what really happened in Ghana. Proof that could either destroy Ji-hwan or, if handled correctly, hand Taehyun everything he'd been denied. He picked up his phone and dialed a private investigator he'd used before. "I need everything you can find on a man named Kwame Mensah," he said. "And I need it discreetly." Meanwhile, Zara sat alone in the break room, staring at the photograph, at her own younger face smiling beside a boy she'd once protected without hesitation. She thought of her father, gone 8 years now, and the strange, guarded way he used to speak whenever Korea came up in conversation. She'd never questioned it before. Now she couldn't stop wondering what else her father had never told her, and whether the answers were about to surface, whether she was ready for them or not. Because somewhere across the city, a man who believed the Kwan Empire belonged to him had just found the thread that could unravel everything. And he intended to pull it. Over the following days, Zara noticed the shift in Ji-hwan immediately. He remembered things about her that she'd never told him in this lifetime. Her favorite Ghanaian dish, a lullaby her mother used to hum, the nickname her father called her when she was small. Each detail landed like a soft blow. Proof that the boy from her childhood had never truly let her go. "How do you know all this?" she asked one evening, as they stood on the office terrace overlooking the city lights. "Because I never forgot," Ji-hwan said. "Not one day." For the first time since the accident, Zara let herself believe this might be real. That the walls around her heart, built after years of losing people, could come down for someone who had never stopped searching. But peace never lasted long in Ji-hwan's world. Taehyun's investigator delivered his report within a week. And what Zara didn't know was that her father's name now sat at the center of a plan designed to destroy everything she was beginning to trust. Taehyun requested a private meeting with her, framed as a welcome gesture from the family. Zara, still unaware of the danger circling her, agreed. "Your father was a remarkable man," Taehyun said, sliding a folder across the table. "Did he ever mention his connection to my family?" Zara frowned, opening the folder. Photographs. Old documents. Her father's name linked to a corporate scandal she'd never heard of. "What is this?" "Proof," Taehyun said smoothly, "that Ji-hwan didn't find you by accident. He's been searching for whatever evidence your father hid, evidence that could protect his own family's reputation. You're not someone he loves, Ms. Mensah. You're a loose end he's been trying to tie up for years." The words cut deeper than Zara expected. She thought of the resources spent finding her, the money quietly paid toward her mother's bills, the promotion that had felt too perfect. Doubt crept in, poisoning every memory she'd rebuilt over the past weeks. She confronted Ji-hwan that same night, her voice shaking with a hurt she hadn't felt in years. "Did you find me because you loved me?" she asked. "Or because you needed something from my father?" Ji-hwan's silence lasted only a second too long. "Zara, it's not that simple. That's not an answer." He reached for her, but she stepped back, the photograph from Ghana crumpled in her fist. "I need time," she said, and walked away before he could stop her. What Zara didn't see was the storm already breaking around Ji-hwan. Within days, fabricated financial records surfaced, tracing false transactions back to his personal accounts. The board convened an emergency session. Reporters camped outside company headquarters. The empire Ji-hwan had spent his life protecting began collapsing in real time, and Taehyun stood at the center of it, offering calm reassurances to the board while quietly feeding the fire. Ji-hwan was suspended from his position within the week. Zara watched the news coverage from her apartment, torn between anger and an ache she couldn't explain away. Whatever was happening to him, whatever truth Taehyun had twisted, something told her this wasn't the full story. She thought of her father again. His guarded silences, the locked box he'd left her that she'd never had the courage to open. She found it in the back of her closet that night, dust thick across its surface. Inside, beneath old letters and a faded family Bible, she found what she hadn't known to look for. A photograph identical to the one Ji-hwan had given her, a sealed letter addressed to her in her father's handwriting, and a small encrypted drive. She opened the letter with trembling hands. "If you're reading this, someone has come looking for what I hid. Know that I protected the Kwan boy because his father saved my life once, long before you were born. Men wanted him dead to seize control of a company that wasn't theirs to take. I found proof of their plan and hid it to keep my family and his safe. Trust the boy with the scar on his wrist, Zara. He was never your enemy. Zara read the letter twice, her vision blurring with tears. Everything Taehyun told her had been a carefully constructed lie, built to turn her against the one person who'd spent his whole life trying to protect her family's legacy as much as his own. She plugged in the drive. Files opened one by one. Documents proving Taehyun's father had orchestrated the attack in Ghana, determined to eliminate Ji-hwan and seize control of the family empire through his son. Financial records tracing the recent fraud accusations directly back to accounts controlled by Taehyun himself. Zara didn't hesitate. She gathered every file, printed what she needed, and drove straight to company headquarters. The boardroom fell silent as she walked in, uninvited, evidence in hand. Ji-hwan sat near the end of the table, stripped of his authority, his expression hollow with defeat. Taehyun rose immediately, feigning outrage. "This is a private meeting," he snapped. "Security. You spent years trying to destroy the wrong family," Zara said, placing the folder on the table. The room shifted its attention as board members began reading. Taehyun's composure cracked as the documents circulated. Proof of his father's decades-old conspiracy, proof of his own fabricated fraud scheme designed to seize control once and for all. Within an hour, security escorted Taehyun from the building. Within a day, Ji-hwan's name was fully cleared, his position restored, his reputation rebuilt from the wreckage Taehyun had tried to bury him under. He found Zara outside the building afterward, evening settling gold and quiet over the city. "You saved me twice," he said softly. "Once when we were children, and now when I had nothing left." "I almost believed him," Zara admitted. "I'm sorry. You came back," Ji-hwan said. "That's all that ever mattered." Months later, they stood together in Accra, in front of the same house where a frightened boy once hid from men who wanted him gone. Ji-hwan looked at the worn gate, the scar on his wrist catching the afternoon light. "You took 15 years to keep your promise," Zara said, smiling. "But I kept it," he replied, taking her hand. The crash that once seemed like the worst moment of Zara's life had instead been the beginning of everything. Proof that some promises, however delayed, always find their way home. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us which moment hit you hardest, because more stories like this one are on the way.